The cold winds of winter had barely left the kingdom when the first shock came. A ship battered and broken washed up on the shores of Agde, a city in the kingdom of the Goths. The ship carried a tale of disaster and near death. It was the return of King Chilperic's envoys from a 3-year journey to the distant lands of the Byzantine Empire, where they had sought aid and alliance from Emperor Tiberius. The envoys, who had set out full of hope and ambition, now returned with their ship in ruins and their spirits broken. King Chilperic, known for his ambitious and often unpredictable nature, was not one to be easily discouraged. When he heard of the envoy's fate, he was already at his villa in Nogent, a place of quiet luxury and strategic importance. There he met with his most trusted advisors, including the Bishop of Rheims, Aegidius, a man whose influence was growing rapidly in the court. Chilperic's mood was somber, but his resolve was as strong as ever. He had a plan, and he was determined to see it through. The king's first move was to strengthen his alliances. He sent Aegidius and a group of leading officials to negotiate a new treaty with his nephew, King Childebert. The goal was clear: to isolate and weaken King Guntram, their common rival. The discussions were intense, but the terms were straightforward. Chilperic would name Childebert his heir, and in return, Childebert would support Chilperic's claim to the lands he sought to control. The agreement was sealed with oaths and the exchange of expensive gifts, a symbol of the new bond between the two kings. But the peace was fragile, and the winds of change were already stirring. Duke Mummolus, a powerful noble who had fallen out of favor with Guntram, fled to Childebert's kingdom and took refuge in the fortified city of Avignon. This move was a clear sign that the old alliances were breaking down, and the balance of power was shifting. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Guntram, tensions were reaching a boiling point. Duke Lupus of Champagne, a loyal supporter of Queen Brunhild, found himself under attack from his enemies. The queen, known for her fierce loyalty and unmatched courage, rode into the battle lines to prevent the conflict from escalating. Her intervention saved Lupus for the moment, but it only delayed the inevitable. Lupus, realizing the danger, fled to Guntram's court, seeking protection. As the political landscape shifted, King Chilperic prepared to leave Nogent for Paris. Before his departure, he had a curious encounter with a Jew named Priscus, a personal agent tasked with making purchases for the king. Chilperic, known for his interest in religious matters, attempted to convert Priscus, a symbol of the king's broader efforts to shape the religious landscape of his kingdom. Priscus, however, remained steadfast in his beliefs, leading to a heated debate that ended with the king's frustration and Priscus's imprisonment. The year 581 was marked by these events, each one a piece in the intricate puzzle of power and alliances that defined the Merovingian kingdoms. The new Treaty of Nogent, the flight of Mummolus, the intervention of Queen Brunhild, and the failed conversion of Priscus, all these incidents set the stage for the coming conflicts and the ongoing struggle for power among the Frankish kings. The year was 583, and the lands of the Franks were filled with both intrigue and conflict. King Chilperic, who had recently welcomed a new son named Theuderic, was navigating a complex web of alliances and betrayals. His envoys, Ansevald and Domagezel, had just returned from Spain, where they had been sent to assess the bridal endowment promised to Chilperic's daughter, Rigunth. They brought news that the Christians in Spain were still holding firm to their faith, despite King Leovigild's attempts to undermine it. Leovigild, it seemed, was playing a dangerous game, pretending to pray at the tombs of martyrs while denying the divinity of the Holy Spirit. Meanwhile, Chilperic's own kingdom was not without its troubles. Duke Asclepius had launched a surprise attack on the guards posted at the bridge over the Orge, killing them and causing chaos in the surrounding area. When Chilperic learned of this, he was ready to launch a full-scale invasion of his brother Guntram's territory. However, the wise counsel of his advisors persuaded him to send envoys to Guntram instead. Guntram, realizing the gravity of the situation, made amends and sought reconciliation with his brother, but the peace was short-lived. Portents and omens began to appear, causing widespread fear. The moon was eclipsed, blood flowed from bread, the walls of Soissons collapsed, and wolves entered the city of Bourges, devouring dogs without fear. Fire raced across the sky, and the city of Bazas was destroyed, with its churches and buildings left in ruin. Despite these signs, Chilperic continued to expand his control, appointing new counts and collecting taxes from cities he had taken from his brother. One of these new counts, Nonitius of Limoges, intercepted a letter from Bishop Charterius of Perigue, which contained harsh words about the king. The bishop claimed he had fallen from paradise to hell, referring to his transfer from Guntram's kingdom to Chilperic's. When the letter was brought to Chilperic, he summoned the bishop and the two men who had been arrested. The bishop denied writing the letter, blaming his deacon, Frontonius. The deacon, however, admitted to writing the letter at the bishop's command. Despite the tension, Chilperic took pity on both men and let them go, even interceding with the bishop to pray for him. Tragically, Count Nonitius died shortly after from a stroke, and his property was divided among several people. Chilperic's new son, Theuderic, brought both joy and concern. The king celebrated the birth by freeing prisoners and forgiving debts, but he also knew that the child's future was uncertain. The arrival of Gunduvald, who claimed to be the son of King Clothar, added to the tension. Gunduvald had a complicated past, having been raised by various kings and even fleeing to Constantinople. Now he had returned to Gaul and was welcomed by Bishop Theodore. However, Duke Guntram Boso, who had a grudge against Theodore, arrested the bishop and charged him with treason. Theodore was eventually released after a miraculous event, but the situation with Gunduvald remained unresolved. Gunduvald's presence in Gaul was a source of great concern for King Guntram, who feared that Gunduvald might try to claim the throne. Guntram Boso, who had been involved in Gunduvald's return, was arrested by Guntram and accused of inviting Gunduvald back to Gaul. Boso's attempt to bring Mammalus, who had initially welcomed Gunduvald, to face the king ended in disaster. Mammalus, known for his cunning, had prepared traps along the Rhone, causing many of Boso's men to drown. Boso himself narrowly escaped, but the siege of Avignon was eventually called off. Chilperic, meanwhile, had entered Paris to celebrate Easter and the baptism of his son. He avoided breaking the agreement with his brothers by having the relics of saints carried before him as he entered the city. The festivities were short-lived, however, as Chilperic soon found himself preparing for war with Guntram. Childebert, Chilperic's nephew, sent envoys to Chilperic, urging him to join forces against Guntram. Chilperic agreed, and the two armies set out to lay waste to the territory of Burges. The battle was brutal, with thousands of men falling on both sides. Despite the initial victory, Chilperic's army was eventually defeated by Guntram's forces. The kings made peace, agreeing to compensate each other for the damages. Chilperic returned to Paris, but the damage had been done. The region was left devastated, and many people and animals were taken as captives. In the midst of all this, King Childebert's army was restless. The soldiers, tired of the constant fighting and the influence of the king's advisors, began to mutiny. They openly accused Bishop Aegidius and the dukes of selling the kingdom and betraying the people. The tension was high, and the future of the Frankish kingdoms remained uncertain. The morning dawned, and the angry crowd, armed with their weapons, rushed to the king's tent. They were determined to find the bishop and the chief officials, hoping to overpower them, beat them, and cut them to pieces. The bishop, hearing about this, quickly fled on his horse, heading back to his city. The crowd chased after him, throwing stones and yelling insults. The bishop managed to escape, because the people didn't have horses ready. His companions eventually slowed down, but he kept going, so scared that he didn't even stop to pick up his boot that had fallen off. He finally reached his city, Rheims, and locked himself inside the walls. A few months before, a man named Ludast came to Tours with a letter from the king, allowing him to get back his wife and live in the city. He also brought a letter from some bishops, asking that he be allowed to join the church again. But I, the bishop, refused because I hadn't received a letter from Queen Fredigund, who was the reason he was excommunicated. I told him, "When I get a letter from the queen, I will let you join the church." I sent a message to the queen, and she wrote back saying, "I had no choice but to let him go. Don't give him peace or let him take communion until I decide what to do." I was worried he might be killed, so I called his father-in-law and warned him to tell Ludast to be careful until the queen's anger cooled down. But Ludast, who already didn't like me, ignored my advice. Ludast went to the king, who was in Melun with his army, and asked the soldiers to help him talk to the king. The king listened to him and said, Be careful for a while until I talk to the queen and figure out how to make things right." But Ludast was too reckless, and thought he was safe because the king had listened to him. On Sunday, when the king went back to Paris, Ludast went to the cathedral and begged the queen for forgiveness. She was furious and drove him away, saying, "I have no sons to protect me. Lord Jesus, please defend me." She fell at the king's feet, saying, "I am so sad I can't do anything to my enemy." Ludast was forced out of the cathedral, and mass began. After the service, the king and queen left, and Ludast followed them, looking at the shops and saying he would buy things because he still had a lot of money. Suddenly, the queen's guards appeared and tried to arrest him. He fought back and cut one of them. This made them even angrier, and they attacked him with their swords. One hit him on the head, and he fled across a bridge. His foot slipped, and he broke his leg. They caught him and tied his hands behind his back. The king ordered doctors to treat Ludast's wounds, so he could be tortured later. He was taken to a royal villa, but his wounds got infected, and he almost died. The queen ordered that a bar of iron be placed under his neck, and another bar was used to strike his throat. This is how Ludast's life ended, and it was a just end for his faithless actions. In the 9th year of King Childebert II, which was 584, King Guntram gave half of Marseille back to his nephew. Envoys from Spain returned and reported that locusts had destroyed everything in Carpetania. No trees, vines, or crops were left. They also said that the conflict between King Leovigild and his son was getting worse. Another group of envoys came from Spain, bringing gifts and asking for King Chilperic's daughter to marry Leovigild's son. Chilperic agreed. But then his son, Theuderic, who had been baptized the year before, got very sick with dysentery and died. The king was devastated and returned to Paris to bury his son. He sent for the envoy to come back and told him, "I need to mourn my son. We can't celebrate the wedding now." Chilperic wanted to send another daughter, who was in a monastery, to Spain, but she refused, and the abbess Rigunth said it wasn't right for a girl dedicated to Christ to return to the world. The queen heard that Theuderic's death was caused by evil magic, and that Mummolus, a prefect she already didn't like, was involved. Mummolus had been at a party when someone said his son was sick with dysentery. Mummolus said he had a herb that could cure it. This made the queen even angrier. She tortured some women in Paris, and they said they had offered her son's life to save Mummolus. The queen punished them severely and then told the king about Mummolus. The king sent men to bring Mummolus to him. They tortured him, but he didn't confess to the magic. He admitted to using potions to win the king's favor. When he was taken down, he told the executioner, "Tell the king I feel fine." The king said, "He must be a sorcerer if he's not hurt." Mummolus was tortured even more, and when they were about to behead him, the queen saved his life. But he lost all his property and was sent back to Bordeaux. He had a stroke on the way and died soon after. The queen burned all the dead boy's clothes and melted down his gold and silver. She wanted to forget her grief. Lupentus, an abbot, was accused of saying something bad about Queen Brunhild. He was cleared and sent home, but the Count Innocentius captured him again and tortured him. He was killed, and his body was thrown in the river. Later, an eagle brought his head to the shore, and he was buried. People say a light appears there, and sick people are healed. Bishop Theodosius of Rhodes died, and there was a big fight over who should replace him. Ursicinus, the bishop of Cahors, was accused of taking parishes that belonged to Rhodes. A meeting of bishops decided that Ursicinus could keep the parishes. Remigius, the bishop of Bourges, died, and a fire destroyed much of the city. Sulpicius was chosen as the new bishop, with King Guntram's support. An envoy named Apilla came from Spain with gifts for King Chilperic. He was worried that King Childebert might attack Spain to avenge his sister, whose husband was in prison. Apilla and I had a debate about religion. King Chilperic found out that his brother, Guntram, and his nephew, Childebert, were planning to take away cities he had taken by force. He moved to Cambrai with all his treasure, and told his dukes and counts to protect their cities. He called his army several times, but always kept them in his own territory. At this time, Chilperic had a son, whom he sent to be raised in a villa, so he wouldn't be seen in public and get hurt. King Childebert invaded Italy, and the Lombards submitted to him out of fear. He returned to Gaul and planned to send an army to Spain, but changed his mind. The Emperor Maurice asked for his money back, but Childebert refused. In Galicia, King Myro was involved in a conflict with Leovigild. Hermenegild, who was in trouble with his father, planned to attack him with the help of Myro. He wanted to put his men in a fortress with special springs, thinking it would give him an advantage, but his father found out and was very upset. The journey of Rigunth, the daughter of King Chilperic, was a long and difficult one. She was being sent to Spain as part of a marriage alliance. Her father, King Chilperic, had returned to Paris and was organizing the trip. He ordered many households to be moved from the royal properties and placed on wagons. People who refused to go were imprisoned, and there was a lot of sadness and crying in Paris. Families were torn apart, and many people even took their own lives because they couldn't bear the separation. King Chilperic promised not to take anything from the cities that belonged to his brother, King Childebert, and not to give his daughter any of the late King Sigebert's treasury. He celebrated the wedding and gave Rigunth a great treasure. Her mother also gave her a lot of gold and silver and fine clothes. The king was surprised by the amount of treasure and thought he had nothing left, but his wife reassured him that it all came from her own property. The journey was filled with troubles. Rigunth's carriage broke down, and many people saw this as a bad omen. Along the way, groups of people would slip away in the night, taking horses and gold with them. The army that accompanied her caused a lot of damage, stealing from the poor and destroying vineyards. They left a trail of destruction wherever they went. King Chilperic, who was known for his cruelty and greed, went hunting at his villa near Paris. One day after returning from the hunt, he was stabbed by an unknown attacker and died. He had a reputation for burning and pillaging villages, punishing people unjustly, and hating the poor. He was also known for his debauchery and for writing bad poetry. When he died, even his followers abandoned him. Bishop Malleolf, who had been waiting to see the king, washed his body and dressed him in better clothes. He then took the body to Paris and buried it in the Basilica of St. Vincent. Queen Fredigund, Chilperic's wife, was left in the cathedral. After Chilperic's death, things got complicated. People of Orleans and Blois attacked Châteaudun, burning houses and taking what they could. In retaliation, the people of Châteaudun and Chartres attacked them back. The counts had to step in to stop the fighting and establish peace. Fredigund, now a widow, took refuge in the cathedral in Paris with the treasure she had hidden. She sent envoys to King Guntram, asking him to take over the kingdom and protect her and her young son, Clothar. Guntram, who was King Chilperic's brother, was sad about his death but agreed to help. He marched to Paris with his army, and when he arrived, Childebert, another nephew, also came. Childebert's envoys tried to convince Guntram to share the kingdom, but Guntram refused, reminding them of past agreements and betrayals. He took control of the kingdom, and promised to protect Fredigund and her son. He also restored many of the things that Chilperic had taken from the people and gave generously to the poor. Guntram, however, was cautious. He didn't trust the people of Paris, and always had a strong guard around him. He asked the people to be loyal, and not to kill him like they had killed his brothers. The people prayed for his safety. Meanwhile, the news of Chilperic's death reached Rigunth's party, and the journey continued amidst the chaos and uncertainty. The year was drawing to a close, and the land was filled with tension and uncertainty. In Toulouse, Rigunth, the daughter of King Chilperic, had arrived with a treasure that was supposed to be part of her dowry. But her journey had been long and tiring, and her people were in no condition to travel further. They decided to stay in Toulouse for a while, but news of Chilperic's death reached Duke Desiderius, who quickly seized the opportunity. He and his men entered Toulouse, took control of the treasures, and placed them under guard. Meanwhile, Gundovald, a man of mysterious origins, was being prepared to claim the throne. With the help of Duke Desiderius and Mammalus, Gundovald was raised on a shield and proclaimed king in Brives-la-Gaillarde. However, the ceremony was not without its hitches. Gundovald nearly fell during the ritual, which was seen as a bad omen. Despite this, he was still recognized as king, and began to tour the nearby cities. Rigunth, still in Toulouse, was staying at the Basilica of the Blessed Mary. The city was also home to the wife of Ragnvald, who had taken refuge there from King Chilperic. Ragnvald, who had been on a diplomatic mission to Spain, returned and reclaimed his wife and property. In Brives, the Basilica of St. Martin was destroyed by an enemy attack, but Bishop Feriolus later restored it so well that it appeared untouched. The people of Brives continued to venerate St. Martin, who was known for his miracles. As winter approached, strange portents appeared in the sky and on the earth. Fresh shoots and misshapen grapes grew on the vines, and a great light crossed the heavens before dawn. An earthquake shook Angers, and other signs of impending doom were seen. These events foretold the death of Gunduvald. King Guntram, seeking to strengthen his power, sent his counts to take control of the cities that had belonged to Childebert, his late brother. The people of Tours and Poitiers initially resisted, but the threat of destruction by fire and sword forced them to submit to Guntram's authority. Despite the oaths they made, the Poitevins did not remain loyal for long. Childebert, the son of Childebert, sent envoys to Guntram to negotiate. The envoys asked for the return of the cities that had belonged to Childebert and for the handover of Fredegund, who was accused of plotting against the royal family. Guntram, however, refused to restore the cities and protect the envoys from insults and humiliation. When they left, Guntram ordered his men to throw filth on them, sending them away in a state of anger and disgrace. Fredegund, now living in the cathedral at Paris, was in a state of rage. She had received news of her daughter's humiliation and the theft of her treasure. Enraged, she ordered her former servant, Leonard, to be stripped and beaten. She also tried to ruin Nectarius, the brother of Bishop Bottigisol, but her attempts were thwarted by the king's patience and Nectarius's brother. Bishop Predixtetus, who had been exiled, was recalled to Rouen by the citizens. When he arrived in Paris to see King Guntram, Fredegund tried to prevent his return, but Guntram decided to welcome him back to his episcopal office. King Guntram, hearing of a plot to assassinate him, took precautions. He surrounded himself with guards and avoided going to church or other places without protection. Not long after, the suspected plotter Ferolf died. Fredegund, once a powerful figure, was ordered to retire to the villa of Ruel. The nobles of Chilperic's kingdom followed her there, promising to care for her son, Clothor II. Fredegund, feeling her power slipping away, plotted to assassinate Queen Brunhild. She sent a cleric to gain Brunhild's trust and kill her, but the plan was discovered. The cleric was captured, beaten, and sent back to Fredegund, who then had his hands and feet cut off as punishment. King Guntram, determined to investigate the death of his brother Chilperic, turned his attention to Eberulf, a chamberlain who had been close to Chilperic. Fredegund accused Eberulf of the murder and of stealing from the treasury. Guntram, in a fit of rage, vowed to destroy Eberulf and his family. Eberulf, realizing the danger, sought asylum in the Basilica of St. Martin, where he was protected by the troops of Orleans and Blois. As the year ended, the kingdom was in a state of turmoil, with old alliances breaking and new ones forming. The future remained uncertain, but the people of the land knew that the coming year would bring more challenges and changes.